In this lesson, we'll be preparing the text for animation by positioning the axes. Okay, so before we get too far into just doing this, we need to really understand why we're doing what we're about to do. So if I click this survey, you'll notice that its axis is way down here. Even if I'm in my object model mode, you'll see that the axis is down here where that extrude was dropped in right on the world axis point, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the axis of the actual text. Now if I select the text, you'll see that the text's axis is already up here. It's not exactly where I need it to be, but it's a lot closer. So I'm going to be setting my keyframes on the outside of all of these extrusions. So I won't be setting it on the actual line, I'll be setting it on the extrude object. So with that in mind, I'm going to just kind of operate under that assumption and then think about what kind of animations I want to create and where the axis needs to be for that animation to look right. So let's just say right now we want to have some kind of a rotation animation, almost like this little bit of text is kind of falling down and sort of swinging until it stops. So if I did that and I went into my coordinates, that would mean that I was going to rotate that on this x-axis. And so you can see that if I start to rotate that, it's not looking like it's swinging at all because the axis is so far beneath it. So I'm going to undo that, and let's actually take a look at what would happen if we moved the axis. So again, undo. I'm going to middle click and go into my front view because it's going to be a lot easier to see this from that view and to see if I'm doing it correctly. So I don't want to be in the rotate tool anymore. I want to be in the move tool. And I need to enable the axis to be able to move it. So with both of those clicked, I'm going to pull that up and I'm going to put it right on top of the text because that's where I want it to swing from. Now I'm also going to double check it from the side. So we'll go in here in the right view and just kind of pan in here. And this one actually looks a little bit better as far as this is at the top, but it's not really right in the middle. So if I want it to be right in the middle, I need to move that back just a little bit in Z space. Okay, so let's turn off our enable axis and move back into our perspective view. And now if I turn on my rotation tool and I rotate on that same axis, you can see that it gives me that little swinging animation that I was looking for. So if I come in there, I can animate like this. So that's important to think about. How do I want this word to animate? And so how do I need to change its anchor point or its axis? So if I go into a global warming, you can see that it's in the same place as the other one was. So I'm going to switch back over to my front view and we'll grab our move tool again and grab our enable axis. And I'm going to put this one in the same place because I want to animate this in very similarly. And I actually want to do that on all of these dates as well. So I'll just scroll down to where those dates begin. And these are going to be a little bit less difficult because they're so much lower down. Now, do I need to move it left and right on that X? You don't have to. It's for the kind of rotation that I'm doing where it's rotating from the top. I don't have to have it right on the left, but if I wanted to rotate it, say, on the Y, like this, then it would make a difference for how I positioned that axis. So keep that in mind, and just remember that it totally depends on where you want it to come from. I like putting it in the upper left-hand corner just because I think it's a little bit easier instead of just kind of putting it right there. It's going to look the same for the animation I'm making, but I just think it looks a little more uniform to have them all in that upper left-hand corner. Now, some of these, I'm going to have to go back in and move back in Z space a little bit. So I'll do that in between lessons because I don't want to bore you with just moving those axes over and over. But let's say I got the rest of those finished. Now, what am I going to do with the percentages? For the percentages, I want it to look a little bit different. I don't want them to swing in. I almost want them to pop in with a scale animation and have a little bit of recoil. So they pop in, get a little bit bigger than I want them to look when they're done, and then shrink back down slightly. So that's a great principle of animation with that recoil, and I think that's a better way to show this off because it's going to look prettier with our line. So with that in mind, I want this to animate in from its center. So if it's starting at 0 and going to 100, I need the axis to be right in the middle. And in the right view, I also want it to be in the middle there as well. So I would need to zoom in and just kind of pull that over a bit. And then move on to the next one. So 57%, we'll just want to move our axis up into the middle, and you can do it from the perspective view, but I think you get better results from the front view and then switching over to the right view for centering it. So those are the three kinds of text I'm going to be dealing with. This main text up here at the top, this swing down text, and then text that's going to pop in. Now in between lessons, I'm going to go into our other files, which I actually have in your reference files now for our other two graphs, and also move their axes as well. Now one of the things you want to make sure of is when you're done moving axes, turn back off that enable axis, because that'll make sure that you get it back in the right place whenever you want to move something later. It'll move the whole thing, not just the axis. Okay, so now that we've prepared a lot of our text, we're going to move on to our next lesson where we'll actually be creating that swinging animation that we moved the axis for. And I'll also be moving the rest of the axes so that you won't have to spend a lot of time doing that. It'll already be prepared for you in your project files. So stick around and we'll create that swinging text animation in the next lesson.